97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast.
I love coaching this football team. I love coaching those players in there.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is with us today. It's brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit up to $250. All right, let's bring him in. Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast, and some news today where Geoff, obviously unfortunate. The hits just keep on coming. Jalen Reagor with a thumb injury. Looks like he's going to need surgery and be out multiple weeks here. Just a huge blow to the Eagles offense. What kind of impact and what's the domino effect now?
Well, there's a lot of layers of the domino effect. First is on the wide receiver position. Jalen Reagor was, even though he wasn't as productive as the team had hoped to be, not really his fault, just the way the offense has been dysfunctional, but he brings a downfield element, especially from that X position where he's mostly been playing from. Now you have to look at your replacements and you go through the options, and there really aren't a lot of options that are proven downfield threats. So one option is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. We'll talk a little bit about him, but even if J.J. Arcega-Whiteside were playing really well, he's not a downfield type of player. Another option would be John Hightower, the fifth-round pick, who does have speed, more of a Z player. You know, when you're X, you get pressed, and he's a little bit of a guy who needs to put on weight and learn how to use his hands. So I'm not sure the X is the best position for him. But if you do need just a decoy, you can put him out there. But again, he didn't have a very good first game and pretty much was benched by the second game. And then, of course, Deontay Burnett is a guy that has protected on the practice squad, was with the team last year, kind of a forgotten man, but kind of part of that team, that offense last year that found some stability there in December and went on that rally and won some games. So the question really becomes is then, you know, how much will each one of those guys play? How much 12 personnel will the Eagles be in? They were in a lot of two tight end, two wide receiver formations against the Rams. I think almost 85% of the offense was 12 personnel, which is high even for them. But even if you're only putting two receivers on the field, Mike, I mean, you still have to wonder who is going to start opposite Deshaun Jackson and who's going to get the most minutes and be impactful. And just to add, the second element of that is everybody's focused on Carson Wentz here and him getting it together and him getting his accuracy and his mechanics together. And there's been this kind of, I guess, supposition that not working with these guys as much because of no OTAs and a truncated training camp has impacted his timing and his rhythm. Well, now you've got different personnel at the X position yet again. So that can't help Carson from his preparation standpoint.
Yeah, let me ask you, does this mean potentially then that they're going to have to play Deshaun Jackson more? I mean, you know, just to keep that speed on the field. I mean, you want to get him off because you want to put him on a pitch count per se, but you have more speed. Now losing Reagor, does that mean they got to say, all right, we're going to have to suck it up and play Jackson more?
Yeah, I think so. And last game he played 77%. So that was higher than I think the 55 to 57% he played in game one. I can't remember. Don't quote me. But of course, they've been trying to work him up a little bit. Obviously, they would love to not have to play him that much, but this situation dictates that they will. And I also wonder, you know, Deshaun added some weight in the offseason. He's not like the really skinny twig that he's been for most of his career. And maybe some of that was due to the injury that he had last year. I remember Adam Kaplan was talking about this, you know, about a month ago on our pod, that he had really developed a little bit more musculature about him. He's been in the league long enough where even though he's always played the Z, because that's just a position where you're not getting pressed at scrimmage, so your light body weight doesn't hurt you as much, and it gives you that extra little, you know, space to fly down the field. I wonder if they consider just playing him at X a little bit and relying on him being a veteran and knowing how to deal with the press. I mean, if you want to press Deshaun Jackson thinking that you're a lot bigger than him, you still got to make sure you put your hands on him, because if not, you're going to get toasted. So maybe he is a guy that they can play at the X and then feel more comfortable putting Hightower, if Hightower is ready, at the Z.
Something that bothers me when looking at the draft from last year, and I know it's nobody's fault that he got injured, but with Jalen Reagor out, you now look at the Hurts situation in the second round. You look at Davion Taylor in the third round. How can you possibly be successful this way?
Isn't it funny how many conversations, it doesn't even have to be about a quarterback, right? How many conversations will always lead back to, did you need to take Jalen Hurts, a backup quarterback in the second round? We could be talking about linebackers right now, right? And saying, hey, the Bengals, they took one in the third and the fourth round, and both of them are actually playing for them this year. Why didn't the Eagles think to take one of those guys? So, yeah, Hunter, I think every and I'm trying not to be, biased. I'm trying to be objective, even though I did not really feel like that was the best value at where they picked. But I do think it's fair to say either, yes, that could have been a player of a different position, including wide receiver, that could have helped them, or B, it could have just been a player who's going to be on the field 60 to 70% of the time at any position that can help you compensate for where you're hurting. So in other words, it could be even a cornerback or a linebacker or a pass rusher who's going to help you in one element of the game while you're hurting at wide receiver.
Jeff, obviously a lot of conversation about Carson Wentz this week, and we had Baldy on earlier talking about the mechanical problems and the footwork and all that stuff. I want to get your take, though. Is that the biggest issue with this offense? Is it simply Carson Wentz is not playing well? Is it do you not like Doug Peterson's play calling? Is there not enough creativity in the offense? Is it simply coming down to, hey, if Wentz plays better, the offense is going to be better? Or are there other factors as to why this offense is struggling?
Well, I do think you have to be fair and look at Carson's mechanics and listen to the experts that have, talked to Adam and I on Inside the Birds, people who are professionals and great tape. And they all tell you that he is doing a lot of things mechanically wrong right now. That doesn't absolve Doug Peterson. It doesn't absolve wide receivers who are not running great routes. It doesn't absolve an offensive line from giving up, pressure. But if you look at the Rams game, he was not hit very much. He was not under duress. And I thought Doug Peterson did a much better job mixing the run and the pass. I mean, I thought Miles Sanders really could have had an even more unbelievable game if Carson had kind of seen him at times and given him a few more opportunities, especially in the passing game. So while I think it's fair to say any one of those other things, the receivers, the line, Doug Peterson can be better, and that would help, I definitely think Carson right now is your biggest issue. His three things: his mechanics being off, his turning the ball over, which are sometimes related, but are also not always related. Sometimes he's just throwing it to the wrong guy on the wrong team, and it wasn't because he bad mechanics. And then obviously not seeing the field. That's another thing that's hurting. There are wide receivers, or players, I should say, who are open on specific plays. They may not be the first read, but we're being told that Carson's kind of staring down that first read too much right now and not seeing a clear picture.
Is it, and real quick, do you think Carson is maybe freelancing too much, that he's kind of taking things into his own hands too much?
Yeah, and I think that what you're hearing from Doug Peterson, that frustration, and finally starting to, not coddle Carson in the media. We talked last week about how do you hold Carson Wentz accountable for being stubborn? You can't bench him because he's your franchise quarterback, and clearly what they've done to this point hasn't worked. So what's the in between? What can they do? Well, maybe it's Doug coming out to the media saying, look, it's a good question if he's regressing, or there are times where he's trying to do a little bit too much. And yes, Carson is freelancing. There are clearly, if you have multiple plays where there are open wide receivers and Carson is trying to instead, wedge the ball in a window that he shouldn't, like the J.J. Arcega-Whiteside interception. Yes, that was not a very good route at all by Arcega-Whiteside, so he certainly can shoulder some of the blame for that. But when the coach comes out and says, well, that's unacceptable, he's got to know that, then that to me is the clearest indication that there are things Carson is doing that are of Carson's doing and Carson's doing only.
I wanted to go down the road of the media stuff because obviously that is a hot topic right now, and you can sense it. There's no doubt you could sense the frustration, but I just question, how much does that help? Is that added pressure that's not needed? Now, if you go down the road you've been going down, do you get anything new? Are the results going to be the same? So I question, hey, does he have to do this because he needs to show everybody like this is the problem right now? I see it going on, and it's weird because we're used to Doug being so pro Carson Wentz and pro the team. It's so weird, and I just don't know if this really helps anything. Does it just add more pressure to him?
I'm not sure if it hurts or helps, to be honest with you, Hunter. That all depends on who Carson is and whether or not he can deal with having a coach be a little bit aggressive with him. If anything, if we're going to go by precedent, right? John DeFilippo, who was not available to the media because he was only the quarterback's coach at the time, but he is someone that challenged Carson Wentz. That's something that Adam Kaplan has detailed for years on our podcast, that those two guys in 2016, butted heads a little bit. And, John DeFilippo would point out to Carson that if he was going to continue to do things that way, he was going to be in trouble. And Carson said, no, I'm good. And then Carson went and threw 17 interceptions in his first year. And then 2017, he was a totally different guy. So if that's what it takes, maybe Doug is saying, this is how I'm pulling out my John DeFilippo card here. I'm going to be hard on him in the classroom now, and I'm going to be hard on him when people ask me questions. If that's the precedent, then you hope that the turnaround is something where Carson receives the message and plays better. But I don't think Carson's the type of guy that necessarily needs that. All you have to do is look at his numbers. They are atrocious. He can't honestly look at himself in the mirror and think, this is good quarterbacking. He can't watch the tape and think, man, next time I'm going to make that play, when for 2 straight weeks he tried to make the play and it didn't work.
You might look at his numbers and say, yes, he's been awful, but are there underlining reasons? Is it just simply the guy's regressed? Is he injured? Is he trying too hard? Do him and Peterson have some sort of rift? Is he, bothered by the fact that they drafted a quarterback? Is he trying to live up to the contract? There's a lot of possibilities here, but what stands out as to why Wentz would be, because this is a guy that, quite frankly, it's hard for people to say this guy, I've seen he's the most overrated player. He has not been this guy. This guy, these first 2 games, he hasn't been this guy. That's not fair to say. So why all of a sudden?
Well, I think that alone, Mike, is a reason where I may not be able to answer the why for you, right? But I may be able to use what you're saying as an indicator of what's going to happen going forward. And I wrote about this on InsideTheBirds.com. Carson Wentz's completion percentage right now, I believe, is 59.5%. All right. He is a career, or 58.8. That's what it is. He's a career 65% passer. All right. So he's normally completing 64% of his passes. Right now he's at 58. That's a big drop. Okay. His passer rating for his career is 91.5. Right now it's 64.5. So he's so below his normal averages. And when you take into account his normal averages, you take into account the fact that he's been streaky before. We saw it last year. We saw it in 2018. Even when he's a streaky quarterback, Mike, he's still a guy usually in the 63 to 64%, and he's still a guy usually around 93 to 100 in his passer rating. To be this low and this off, to me, and I could be wrong about this, but it represents a little bit of an anomaly, right? I can't imagine that at the end of the year, Carson Wentz is going to be completing less than 60% of his passes and have a passer rating around 64. I think he's in a bad slump. I think he's probably tried to do a little bit too much. Why? That's a great question. Jalen Hurts being there, I don't know. Doug, I don't know. Maybe it's all the new coaches that they brought in on offense, and now there's all these new ideas, and he's trying to please everybody. I don't know, but I do suspect, based on the trajectory of Carson's career, that he's going to at least snap out of it to the point where he's more accurate and he's a more caretaker, a better caretaker of the football. I don't think he's ever going to be Drew Brees. I don't think he's ever going to be like that Phillip Windows river thrower. He's never going to be consistently 68, 69, or nowadays people are at 70%. I don't think that's ever going to be him. But I do think he's last year, Mike, he was the quarterback the whole year, and the Eagles had the 4th best third down percentage in the league and the 3rd best red zone percentage in the complete red zone efficiency in the league. So he was pretty brilliant at situational football. You can't take that away from him. So everything suggests to me that he's in a really bad funk and that he's going to come out of it.
I would have to agree with everything you said. I do believe that it will work out and he'll get back to who he was. But even when he was playing his better football, there were some accuracy issues and some mechanic problems as well. And I just wonder, is it possible that he isn't even being taught properly? Now, I'm a guy who thinks, you got to blame the player more than the coaching staff in any sport. But if you are a quarterback and you are getting new voices in there and Press Taylor and DeFilippo, you want to go down the list of, who he was working with, is it possible that he's not even being taught the right thing when it comes to mechanics?
It's a fair question, but if that's the case, then why was he able? I mean, he's had the same quarterbacks coach for the last 3 years now, right? Press Taylor. Ever since DeFilippo left, it's been Press Taylor. I think that was the exchange. So he was good enough in 2018 to have a 102.2 passer rating and complete 69.6% of his passes. He was good enough last year to have a 93.1 and a 64 completion percentage. So could maybe a different quarterback coach, one better than Press Taylor, have him playing more consistently? Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, in 2017, when he was like the MVP of the league, he was completing just 60% of his passes, which is almost strange. What a weird year that was, that he had one of his lowest completion percentages of his career. But to me, what you're asking, Hunter, is more about that is a very valid and fair question to approach after this season is over. Let's see how he finishes. Let's see what happens. And if he's really sunken and a broken quarterback who just never played like he had played the last 3 years, I think it's fair to say, well, maybe he's just regressed to the point where he can't get it back and the coaching isn't good enough. And if that's the case, Hunter, right, if Carson Wentz bombs, then this team's going to bomb. And if this team bombs, you know what happens? Turnover happens. This team fires coaches when they go to the playoffs 3 years in a row. So you know what would happen if they actually missed the playoffs, what would happen with the front office and the coaching staff.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast. All right, the defense. We know the linebackers are a big problem, but we talked about with Baldy earlier today. He said, yeah, okay, they're not great, but the defensive line, which you have all this money invested in, they were really bad. That's one area that we were hopeful that may not have only been the strength of the team, Jeff, might have been one of the biggest strengths in the league, is your defensive tackles, which typically help you against the run, and that you had, ends that you have a lot of money invested in. Is this going to be a constant problem, or did the Rams just out-scheme Jim Schwartz, and Schwartz essentially took the bullet and pointed the finger at himself?
Interesting that Brian made that point. I would love to have heard him expand on it, because I felt that the defensive line.
You can go to our YouTube channel and find the interview right there.
I meant before I did this interview, but I will go check it out. I felt in just watching tape, and then also, when we did our podcast, our tape review and talk to sources, that the defensive ends had some break contain issues that certainly let Jared Goff get out of the pocket. I saw a couple of times Brandon Graham, in particular, a savvy veteran, break his contain. But I felt that the defensive line did a good job in pressuring Goff when he was in the pocket. If you see Goff's numbers from inside the pocket, he was god-awful, to be honest with you. He was really – part of the reason the Eagles started coming back in the second quarter and the third there is because they started to do a better job of keeping him in the pocket a little bit more. And then Fletcher Cox batted down a pass, and they got some interior pressure on him, and I thought they were all right. But there was some break contain from the ends, and that, I think missing Vinny Curry hurt them, because Curry is one of their better and more disciplined run defenders. But you're right, this is too good of a line to have those kind of breakdowns, and they should have done better. I think the poor run defense, especially in late third, fourth quarter. Obviously, the defense was on the field for a really long time there, and they haven't been able to rotate as much without Vinny Curry, and with Barnett and Hargrave only able to play I think small parts of the game, 35% of the game. They just didn't have the rotation that they would normally have. I'm not making excuses. I agree with you that the line has to play better. I just thought it was I honestly think Jim Schwartz could have done a better job of forcing the issue on Jared Goff a little bit earlier. What was Goff, 13 for his first 13?
Mm-hmm.
Something, I feel maybe after he's 5 for 5 or 6 for 6, you start to force the issue a little bit more.
How is, in your opinion, then, this new rebuilt secondary holding up? Have they been, hey, look, they're not as big as a problem as they used to be, or is it, hey, I thought they'd be better? Slay, you got here. I think he's, I don't remember him getting beat any big plays yet. I don't feel like they've gotten beat over the top like they constantly did in the past. The tight end smoked them in the last game, but you got a lot of new pieces in that secondary. How are they holding up?
You almost laugh. If you're an Eagles fan, you have to laugh to keep from crying at some point. Because, Mike, how many times did we talk last year? How many times did we say, if the Eagles could just not get beat over the top all the time, every game, they could win a lot of games. That was their Achilles heel. And just like you mentioned, they haven't been beaten over the top by a wide receiver in 2 weeks, and they're 0-2. So it's almost unbelievable that would happen. But it's true. I think Slay obviously did a good job of McClure in the season opener. He didn't really have a ton of burners that he had to deal with against the Rams. Kupp and Woods are more savvy route runners, but obviously the tight ends did all the damage there. I think Nickel Roby-Coleman has not played as well as people have expected him to play, and I'm sure as the team expected him to play. It's only 2 games. He'll have a chance to atone this week going up against Tyler Boyd of the Bengals, who's a pretty good slot receiver, but he has not done well. And I think it's been difficult for Jalen Mills in his adjustment to, I guess, this safety position that he's playing. I really thought Will Parks was going to take that job if he was healthy. He probably should have. You look at that first touchdown that they gave up to Higbee. That was, it appears to be on Nate Gary, but what happens is Jalen Mills, for whatever reason, decides he's going to rush the passer or play the run. He got suckered by the rollout and play action. And I was told that he was supposed to be patrolling the flat there on a pass. So he clearly was not in the flat. That's where the pass went. And Gary was the closest guy, so he had to get over there quickly and couldn't. So it kind of looked like it was on Gary, as if there was a blitz happening, but that's not the case. So Jalen Mills not helping the defense there as well. So to answer your question, Slay has kind of held up his end of the bargain, but everybody else has not all played all that well.
Okay, a couple of quickies. Pressure on Peterson, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, when you're 0-2 and you're playing a winless team, I mean, yeah, of course there's pressure on Peterson. I think that there's –
And by the way, the schedule is brutal coming up.
Yeah, it is brutal.
San Fran, Baltimore, Pittsburgh.
San Francisco, but yeah, I mean, they may be catching San Francisco at a really good time because who knows if Garoppolo and Mostert will be – and Bosa definitely won't be there. But that's still a tough game, in my opinion. But, yeah, that's why it's such a must-win game. I don't normally say that, but, man, they really need to beat – the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think there's always, like I said a couple minutes ago, the Eagles went 9-7, won the division, made the playoffs for the 3rd straight year. And how many coaches got fired? 4. So of course there's pressure on Doug Peterson. He's 3 years now removed from the Super Bowl. And every year it seems to be the same story of having your back against the wall and trying to fight and claw. And that's not how teams want to operate.
And then the last thing that I want to throw your way, you take a look at, basically, you talk about Peterson and that and the whole organization. I mean, do you feel there's a disconnect somewhere in this organization? Like the whole season just feels weird. Like the whole report with Ertz getting into a shouting match with Roseman and then the way Doug and Carson, it just seems that this has the feeling of one of those years where everything just kind of goes plump.
Well, I think that's a fair comment. I think you can look back to what I'm alluding to at the end of last year. Coaches get fired, even though a head coach goes to a press conference and says they're going to be rehired. Of course, there have been, reports about what happened there. I think, and by the way, it's not uncommon. There's always kind of, not every single team, including winning teams, always have great harmony at the top. But I do think that there's some tenuousness about this. I mean, obviously, this year's draft, I'm going to guess Jim Schwartz thought he was going to be getting himself a linebacker who could actually get on the field and create an impact this year. By the way, I want to address this, Mike, real quick before I get off. This idea of absolutes, right? Most people say you don't really judge a draft pick till 3 years down the road. And also, when you do draft a player, you're thinking of what that player is going to be in 3 years. So you can't, like with J-Jaw, right? After a bad year, you can't just judge him on what he does year one. But I want to add to that. It doesn't mean that these guys are exempt from being contributors in year one, in year two. And that's right now what you're getting from Davion Taylor at the moment. And of course, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is barely contributing as a second-round pick into his second year. So I think that, when Jim Schwartz wanted a linebacker, and one who could play, and he doesn't have one right now who could play, who was drafted very high. So add that to the layer of
especially when you took a guy in the second round who wasn't going to help you. You can't follow up a third-round pick and have a guy who's a project.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you.
He's Geoff Mosher, and of course the Inside the Birds podcast. You can hear those guys, and of course, find out where you can get your wherever you get your podcasts and whatever podcasting platform you can get Inside the Birds. They've got the Inside the Birds pregame show on Facebook. You can see that live with Trey Thomas, Adam Kaplan, Geoff Mosher, and every Sunday at 10 o'clock or whenever the Eagles play. It's 2 hours before Eagle games.
2 hours before the Eagles game. It's been a great experience. Trey and Greg Cosell, amazing at breakdown. And by the way, Trey and Derek Gunn are going to have their second episode of Grilling the Birds coming out tomorrow morning on the Inside the Birds YouTube channel. I've already seen it. It's great. Everybody's going to love it.
All right. Geoff will be back on Friday with thoughts on this matchup with the Bengals. And, of course, he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Geoff Mosher, thanks, pal.
You got it.
All right. Great stuff from Mosher as we break down that Eagles loss from the other day. One final look back at the tape there and everything that happened, and then Mosher will be back. Tomorrow it's Adam Kaplan who will give us some insight on what's going on with this team moving forward.